The dog led his owner to the old train. What was inside was a secret hidden for years. Jason Miller woke up once again to Buddy's insistent barking at 5:47 in the morning. The white, wavy-coated dog wouldn't stop scratching the back door, as he had been doing for weeks, always at the same time. From that morning on, Jason's life would never be the same. Buddy not only barked, but pulled on his leash toward the dense woods behind his property, heading toward the old railway line abandoned for over 20 years. The 52-year-old man sighed as he put on his work boots. Since his wife Emily had passed away 3 years ago, a victim of a prolonged illness, Buddy was his only company in that simple wooden house on the outskirts of Millbrook, a small town in the interior of New York. The animal's strange behavior had started the previous Monday. Jason initially thought it was just boredom or some wild creature catching Buddy's attention. But the insistence was different from anything he had witnessed in the 8 years the dog had lived with them. "What is it, old man?" murmured Jason, putting the leash on the animal's neck. "This again?" Buddy wagged his tail and practically dragged him out the door. The morning was humid and a thin mist hung among the trees. Jason knew that path well. As a child, he used to play on the tracks with his friends before the line was decommissioned in the late 90s. The railroad connected Millbrook to neighboring towns and had been crucial for transporting coffee in the region. As they walked, Jason noticed that Buddy followed a specific route, as if he knew exactly where to go. The dog stopped occasionally, sniffed the air, and continued with determination. After about 15 minutes of walking through the woods, they reached the rusty tracks. There it was, an old train, almost completely overtaken by vegetation. Jason stopped abruptly, feeling a shiver run down his spine. It wasn't the first time he had seen that abandoned train, but he had never paid much attention. The weeds had grown so thick around it that it was hard to tell where nature ended and the rusted metal began. "How did you know this was here?" he asked the dog, who kept pulling toward the cars. Buddy barked once and slipped out of his leash, running to one of the side doors of the first car. Jason noticed something that alarmed him. The door was slightly ajar, and it didn't seem to have been that way for decades. The stiff metal folds suggested that someone had forced it open recently. Jason's heart raced. Who could be messing with that abandoned train? And why did Buddy seem to know the place? With cautious steps, he approached the entrance. The door creaked as he pushed it open completely. The sunlight filtering through the leaves created an almost mystical atmosphere inside the car. What Jason saw left him speechless. The interior wasn't abandoned as he had expected. There were old suitcases carefully arranged against one wall, as if someone were planning a trip. On a small makeshift table, photographs were neatly displayed. Jason picked up the first photo with trembling hands. It was a black and white image of a baby in the arms of a young woman. The baby had the same light eyes Jason saw in the mirror every day. But the woman was completely unknown to him. "This isn't possible," he whispered to himself. Buddy had entered the car and lay down beside the suitcases, as if that were his natural place. Jason examined other photographs. There were several of the same woman, always alone or with the baby. One photo showed her in front of a house Jason didn't recognize, holding the child and smiling at the camera. On the back of one of the photographs, he found a date, 1972, my little Jason. He had been born in 1972. It couldn't be a coincidence. Jason's hands trembled as he flipped through the other photos. He found one of the pregnant woman, another of the baby taking its first steps, and a third that made him choke up. It was himself, probably about 3 years old, playing in an unfamiliar yard next to the same woman. "Dad never showed me these photos," he said aloud, as if Buddy could give him explanations. Jason sat on one of the suitcases and tried to process what he was seeing. His mother, Margaret, had passed away when he was only 5 years old. The only childhood photos he knew were the ones his father, William, had kept. All of them showed Jason with his father or with his paternal grandmother. He had never seen pictures of his mother, except for a single photo of his parents' wedding. But the woman in the photographs wasn't Margaret. Buddy got up and walked to another part of the train car, sniffing one of the larger suitcases. Jason followed him and carefully opened the rusty latch. Inside, he found women's clothes carefully folded, old perfumes, and a small wooden box. The box contained letters, dozens of them, all addressed to William Miller at the address where Jason had grown up. The sender was always the same: Grace Johnson. Jason opened the first letter with trembling fingers. My dear William, it's been 2 months since you left with our son. I understand that you thought it was for the best, but my heart is broken. How is little Jason? Does he remember me? Every night I look at his photo and imagine how he's growing up. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Jason let the letter fall. His legs went weak, and he had to lean against the wall of the train car. Grace Johnson. That name had never been mentioned in his home. As far as he knew, Margaret was his mother, and she had passed away when he was little. He picked up another letter, dated a few months later. William, I received your letter saying I shouldn't look for you anymore, but how can I not look for my own son? I know you've remarried and want to start a new life, but Jason is my blood. At least tell me that he's well, that he's happy. Jason's world seemed to be crumbling. He picked up another letter. It's been a year, William. A year without seeing my boy. I moved to the neighboring town to be closer, even though I know you don't want to see me. Sometimes I pass by the school and see a child who might be him. My heart races every time. Jason went through the entire box. There were letters from various years, always with the same desperate tone. The last one was from 1980. William, I heard that you moved away. I couldn't find out where. Maybe it's better this way. Maybe Jason is happier without knowing about me. But I want you to know that I will never stop loving him. One day when he's older, perhaps you'll tell him the truth. This is my last letter. Grace. Buddy whimpered softly, as if sensing Jason's despair. The man knelt down and hugged the dog, trying to understand what all of this meant. Who is Grace Johnson, Buddy? Why did my father never tell me about her? Jason searched the rest of the train car and found more disturbing evidence. There was a photo album hidden under one of the suitcases. Page after page showed Jason growing up, always in the company of Grace. They were photos obviously taken from a distance, as if she had been watching him without his knowledge. One particularly touching photo showed Jason on what appeared to be his first day of school. He was at the door of a school he recognized, but the photo had been taken from very far away, probably from the street. In the margin, written in pencil, "My boy has grown so much." Jason felt tears burning his eyes. Grace had spent years watching him grow from afar, documenting his life through stolen photographs. The last item he found was a birth certificate, his birth certificate, but it showed a different name than the one he knew. Instead of Margaret Miller as the mother, it read Grace Johnson. "This is impossible," murmured Jason. "My certificate says Margaret is my mother." Buddy walked to the car door and looked at Jason as if saying it was time to leave. But Jason couldn't move. He was paralyzed by the discovery. Had his entire life been a lie? Was Margaret not his biological mother? Where was Grace now? Why had his father hidden this from him all these years? Jason gathered some of the photos and letters and put them in a bag he found in the car. He needed answers, and he knew exactly who could give them: Mrs. Parker. The 83-year-old neighbor knew everyone in Millbrook. She had lived in town her whole life and had an elephant's memory for faces and stories. If anyone knew Grace Johnson, it would be her. The way back home seemed longer than usual. Jason could barely process what he had discovered. Buddy trotted beside him, apparently calmer now that they had visited the train. Arriving home, Jason went straight to the neighbor's house. Mrs. Parker was watering the plants on the porch when she saw him approaching. "Good morning, Jason. What's that look? You look like you've seen a ghost," said the lady with her characteristic smile. "Mrs. Parker, do you know a woman named Grace Johnson?" The neighbor's reaction was immediate. The watering can slipped from her hands and crashed onto the porch's ceramic floor. Her face visibly paled. Where did you hear that name?" she asked with a trembling voice. "Please, do you know who she is?" Mrs. Parker sat in a wicker chair, as if her legs could no longer support her. "Jason, my boy, sit here beside me. We need to talk." The lady's serious tone made Jason's stomach churn. He sat next to her, still holding the bag with the photographs. Grace Johnson. Mrs. Parker sighed deeply. I haven't heard that name in over 20 years. You know her? I did, Jason. Grace was... She paused for a long time. Grace was your father's first wife. Jason felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. First wife? But my father was only married to Margaret. No, my boy. Your father was married to Grace first. You are her son. The photographs fell from Jason's bag and scattered across the porch floor. Mrs. Parker looked at them with an expression of deep sadness. Where did you get these photos? In the old train in the woods. Buddy led me there and I found a car full of her things. Mrs. Parker sighed again and began picking up the photographs. Your father asked me never to tell you this. He said it would be better if you didn't know. But why? Why did he hide my real mother from me? It's a complicated story, Jason. Grace and your father separated when you were about 2 years old. There were many fights, many problems. Your father ended up with your custody and moved here with you. Soon after, he met Margaret and they married. But Margaret died when I was 5. Why didn't he tell me about Grace after that? Your father always thought it would be better for you. Margaret was a wonderful mother to you in those 3 years. She loved you as if you were her own son. Jason stood up abruptly, making the chair scrape against the floor. But I had the right to know. Grace was my real mother. I know, my boy. I often thought about telling you, but I promised your father. Where is Grace now? Mrs. Parker lowered her head. I don't know, Jason. After you moved here, she disappeared. Some say she left for New York. Others think she might have passed away too. Jason felt a mix of anger and sadness he had never experienced before. His whole life had been built on a lie. Grace had spent years trying to keep in touch with him, and his father had prevented it. I need to talk to my father, said Jason, already heading for the gate. Jason, wait. Your father is very fragile now. That stroke last year, he's not the same anymore. Jason stopped. It was true. William Miller, now 81 years old, had suffered a mild stroke and was living in a retirement home on the outskirts of town. His memory had been compromised, and he sometimes didn't even recognize his own son. He needs to tell me the truth, Mrs. Parker. I deserve to know. Take it easy, my boy. Be gentle with him. Jason returned home with his head spinning. Buddy followed him and lay at his feet as he sat in the kitchen, trying to process everything he had discovered. He looked at the photographs scattered on the table. In one of them, Grace was holding him in her lap and smiling radiantly at the camera. She seemed like a sweet, caring woman. Why had his father kept her out of his life? Jason picked up the phone and called the Golden Years retirement home, where his father lived. Good afternoon, this is Jason Miller. I'd like to schedule a visit with my father, William Miller. Good afternoon, Jason. You can come whenever you'd like. Your father is having a good day today. Jason took a deep breath. It was now or never. An hour later, he was sitting across from his father in the visiting room of the retirement home. William was in a wheelchair looking out the window. When he saw Jason, his face lit up. Jason, it's so good you came to visit me. Hi, Dad. How are you feeling? Good, good. Yesterday I was talking with your mother. William stopped mid-sentence, confused. I mean, Margaret has passed away, hasn't she? Jason took a deep breath and decided to be direct. Dad, I need to talk to you about something important, about Grace Johnson. William's reaction was instant. His body stiffened and he looked at Jason with wide eyes. Where did you hear that name? I found photographs of her with me when I was a child, and letters she wrote to you. William began to tremble. He brought his hands to his face and started to cry. I didn't want you to know. Why, Dad? Why did you hide my real mother from me? Because I thought it would be better for you. Grace was... She had problems, Jason. What kind of problems? William hesitated for a long moment. She drank, Jason. Drank heavily. And when she drank, she became aggressive. I was afraid she would harm you. Jason felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. But in the letters she seemed so sad, like she just wanted to be close to me. At first she tried to stop drinking, but she couldn't. After we separated, she got much worse. I thought it would be better for you to grow up away from that. But you could have told me when I got older. How could I tell you, Jason? How could I tell my son that I hid his real mother from him his whole life? William kept crying, and Jason felt his anger mixing with compassion. He could see that his father had carried this burden for decades. Where is she now, Dad? I don't know, my son. After you moved, she tried to find us a few times, but I always moved addresses, until she stopped looking. Do you know if she's still alive? William shook his head. I don't know, Jason. It haunts me every day. Jason stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see a well-kept garden where some elderly people were walking slowly. I need to find her, Dad. Jason, maybe it's better to leave the past in the past. No. Jason turned abruptly. She's my mother. Even if she has problems, even if she's not perfect, she's my mother, and I need to know what happened to her. William sighed deeply. If you really want to find her, maybe Ruth could help. Who's Ruth? Ruth Johnson, Grace's sister. She lived in Stamford the last I heard. If Grace is alive, Ruth should know where she is. Jason wrote the name on a piece of paper. Dad, why did Buddy know where to find Grace's things on the train? William looked confused. Buddy? Your dog? Yes. He led me straight to the car where the photographs and letters were. That's strange. Buddy is too young to have known Grace. But Jason suddenly remembered something. Buddy wasn't as young as he thought. Emily had found the dog on the street 8 years ago, but he already seemed to be an adult back then. Buddy could be much older than they imagined. Dad, is it possible that Buddy belonged to Grace? William was silent for a long time. Grace had a dog, a white mutt she adored. She called him, I don't remember the name. Jason felt a shiver. Could it be that Buddy was Grace's dog? That would explain why he knew the way to the train and why he had been acting so strangely. I need to go, Dad, but I'll be back soon. Jason, be careful. Sometimes it's better not to reopen old wounds. Dad, this wound never had a chance to heal. It's been open my whole life. On the way back home, Jason couldn't stop thinking. If Buddy really had belonged to Grace, how had he ended up with Emily 8 years ago? And why had he only now started showing this strange behavior? Arriving home, Jason examined Buddy more carefully. The dog really did look older than they thought. His fur was grayer than Jason had noticed before, and he moved with the slowness characteristic of an elderly animal. You know Grace, don't you, Buddy? The dog looked at Jason with intelligent eyes, as if he perfectly understood what was being asked. Jason decided he needed to find Ruth Johnson. She was his only clue to discovering Grace's whereabouts. The next morning, Jason called directory assistants and got the phone number for a Ruth Johnson in Stamford. With his heart racing, he dialed the number. Hello? Good afternoon, I'd like to speak with Ruth Johnson, sister of Grace Johnson. There was silence on the other end of the line. Who's speaking? My name is Jason Miller. I'm Grace's son. The silence lasted so long that Jason thought the call had dropped. Jason? The woman's voice was trembling. Little Jason? Yes, ma'am? My God, after all these years, Grace always said that one day you would come looking for her. Jason felt tears welling up in his eyes. Do you know where she is? Jason, my dear, I have so much to tell you. Can you come here to Stamford? Yes, I can. When? Today, if possible. Grace really needs to see you. Is she alive? Jason barely managed to ask. Yes, my dear. She's alive. And she never stopped talking about you. Jason hung up the phone with trembling hands. Grace was alive. His biological mother was alive and had spent all these years without knowing about him. 2 hours later, Jason was driving to Stamford with Buddy in the passenger seat. The dog seemed restless, as if he knew something important was happening. Ruth's house was simple, in a quiet residential neighborhood. A woman around 60 years old opened the door as soon as Jason parked the car. She had the same light eyes he'd seen in Grace's photographs. "Jason?" she asked with an emotional voice. "It's me, Mum." Ruth didn't say anything else. She just hugged him tightly, as if embracing a long-lost son. Come in, Grace is inside." Jason felt his legs tremble. "She's here?" "Yes, she's lived with me for 5 years, ever since—" Ruth didn't finish the sentence, but Jason understood. Grace had moved in with her sister because she had nowhere else to go. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. They entered the house and Jason heard slow footsteps coming from the kitchen. A woman around 70 years old appeared in the doorway. She was shorter than Jason had imagined, with grey hair tied in a simple bun. But her eyes were exactly the same as in the photographs. "Grace," Ruth said softly, "look who came to visit you." Grace looked at Jason and her legs weakened. She had to lean against the doorframe. "Jason," she whispered. "My boy." "Hi, Mom," Jason said, and it was the first time in his life he'd used that word referring to her. Grace began to cry and stretched out her arms. Jason approached and hugged her, feeling as if a part of himself that had been lost had finally returned home. "I knew you'd look for me one day," Grace said through tears. "I always knew." They sat in the living room, and Jason could observe his mother more closely. She seemed fragile, thinner than in the photographs. There was a deep sadness in her eyes, but also immense joy at seeing her son. "Why did you never try to find me after I stopped receiving your letters?" Jason asked. Grace lowered her head. "Your father was right, Jason. I wasn't a good mother back then. Drank too much, had problems. I thought it would be better for you to grow up away from me. But I wanted to be with you. I read your letters and saw how much you loved me." "You read my letters?" Grace looked surprised. Jason told her about the discovery on the train, about Buddy and all the photographs. When he mentioned the dog, Grace became even more emotional. "Buddy? You have a dog named Buddy?" "I do. He's in the car." "Why?" "I had a dog with that name, a white mutt I adored. When your father took you away, Buddy disappeared too. I looked for him for months." Jason felt a shiver run down his spine. "Grace, would you like to see the Buddy who lives with me?" "Yes, I would." Jason went to the car and brought Buddy. As soon as the dog saw Grace, he started barking joyfully and ran to her, jumping on her lap as if he were a puppy. "Buddy!" Grace cried, hugging the animal. "My Buddy! How you've grown!" The dog kept licking Grace's face, clearly recognizing his former owner. "How is this possible?" Jason asked. "Buddy appeared in my life 8 years ago. How did he know where to find me?" Ruth, who had been watching everything in silence, finally spoke. "Grace, you need to tell him about the train." Grace hesitated, still petting Buddy. "What train?" Jason asked. "The train where you found my things." "I lived there for a few years." Jason was stunned. "You lived in the abandoned train? After you moved away and I couldn't find you anymore, I ended up losing my home. I had nowhere to go. The train was abandoned. It was a place to stay. I lived there for almost 10 years. And Buddy was with you?" "He was. He was my only company. But one day he disappeared. Went out hunting like he always did and didn't come back. I looked for him for weeks." Jason began to understand. Buddy had disappeared near the train and somehow had found Emily, who in turn was married to Jason. Fate had conspired to reunite mother and son through the dog. "Emily found Buddy on the road very close to where the train is," said Jason. "She brought him home and he stayed with us ever since." "Was Emily your wife?" asked Grace. "She was. She passed away 3 years ago." "I'm so sorry, my son." Jason felt a wave of emotion. It was strange to hear Grace refer to him as my son after so many years. "Grace, why did you leave the train?" "Ruth found me. After years of searching, she discovered where I was living and brought me here." "How did she find you?" Ruth sat down next to her sister. "A woman from your town called me. Said she had seen a person living in the abandoned train and that they seemed to need help. I went there and it was Grace." "Who was this woman?" "Mrs. Parker," said Ruth. "She said she knew Grace from when you lived in Millbrook." Jason was surprised. Mrs. Parker had found Grace and hadn't told him anything. But then he thought better of it. The neighbor probably didn't know that Jason was looking for his biological mother. "Grace, did you leave your things on the train when you left?" "I did. They were the only things I had left of you. I couldn't take everything." Jason looked at Buddy, who had settled in Grace's lap as if he had never left. "Why did Buddy only now start leading me to the train?" "Maybe he felt it was time," said Grace. "Animals have an intuition that we don't have." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking. Grace told them about the difficult years she had gone through, about how she had struggled with alcoholism and how she regretted not fighting harder to stay close to Jason. "I was very young when you were born," she said. "I was only 19. I didn't know how to be a mother, and when your father said I wasn't good for you, I believed him. And now, have you stopped drinking?" "I stopped 8 years ago. That's when Ruth brought me here. She helped me recover." Jason looked at the aunt he didn't know he had. "Thank you so much for taking care of her." "Grace is my only family," said Ruth, "and now you are too." When the sun began to set, Jason knew it was time to go home, but he didn't want to be separated from Grace again. "Can I come visit you again?" "You can come whenever you want, my son. This is your home too." "Actually," said Jason hesitantly, "I'd like to propose something." "What?" "How about you two come live with me in Millbrook? The house is big, there's room for everyone, and that way we can make up for lost time." Grace and Ruth looked at each other. "Are you sure, Jason?" asked Grace. "After everything that happened?" "I'm sure. You're my mother, no matter what happened in the past." "And your father? How will he react?" Jason thought of William, alone in the retirement home. "My father can come live with us too, if he wants to, of course." "All together?" asked Ruth, surprised. "Why not? We're a family. Families stick together." A week later, Jason was helping Grace and Ruth move into his house. It was quite a task to accommodate everyone, but Jason had never felt so happy. Buddy was radiant to have Grace back. The dog wouldn't leave her side for a minute, as if he wanted to make up for the 8 years they were apart. The most surprising reaction was William's. When Jason told him that he had found Grace and that she would come live with them, the old man began to cry. "I did a lot of wrong things, Jason," he said. "Grace didn't deserve to be treated that way." "Dad, you can talk to her in person if you want. She understands." "I'd really like that." The reunion between William and Grace was emotional. They both apologized to each other, and Grace even thanked William for taking good care of Jason all those years. "Margaret was a good mother to him," said Grace. "I'm not jealous of that. I just want to make up for the lost time." With the family reunited, Jason decided he wanted to learn more about the train where Grace had lived. He went back there several times, always accompanied by Buddy, to collect the rest of her things. It was during one of these visits that he made a discovery that would change everything again. In the last car of the train, which was harder to access because of the vegetation, Jason found something unexpected. It wasn't just Grace's things. There were other suitcases, other belongings, other photographs. "Buddy, what is this?" murmured Jason, examining a suitcase that clearly didn't belong to his mother. Inside the suitcase, he found documents in other people's names, photographs of other families, letters addressed to other names. Jason realized the train had served as shelter for several people over the years. Grace hadn't been the only one living there. When he returned home and told the family about the discovery, Ruth had an interesting reaction. "Jason, do you remember I told you Mrs. Parker called me about Grace?" "I do." "She said she was worried because several people had lived in the train over the years, people who had nowhere else to go." "Other people like Grace?" "That's right. Mrs. Parker said she tried to help when she could, but she didn't have the resources to help everyone." Jason had an idea. "What if we turned the train into something useful, a place where people in need could stay temporarily?" "How do you mean?" asked Grace. "A temporary shelter. For people who lost their homes, who are going through hard times. The train is just sitting there, abandoned. We could renovate it." William, who was listening to the conversation from his wheelchair, became excited. "That's a good idea, Jason. I have some savings that could help with the renovation." "Dad, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. It's my way of making up for past mistakes." And so began the most ambitious project of Jason's life. With help from Grace, Ruth, William, and several neighbors, including Mrs. Parker, They began transforming the abandoned train into a temporary shelter. The work was difficult. The cars needed cleaning, structures needed reinforcement, and all the electrical and plumbing systems had to be installed from scratch. But the community mobilized in a way Jason had never imagined. The town mayor, upon learning about the project, offered support from the city council. The local church organized donation drives. Regional business owners contributed construction materials. During the renovation, Jason discovered more about the train's history. Mrs. Parker, who proved to be an endless source of information, said the train had been abandoned there in the 1990s, when the railway line was decommissioned. Many people have lived in this train over the years, she said. People who lost their homes, families who went through hard times. Your project will formalize something that was already happening informally. The renovation took 6 months. When they finished, the train had been transformed into a series of small temporary lodgings with a community kitchen, shared bathrooms, and a common area. Grace insisted on being one of the shelter's coordinators. "I want to help people who went through what I went through," she said. "I want them to know there's always hope." Buddy became the shelter's unofficial mascot. The elderly dog seemed to understand this place was special and always greeted newcomers with enthusiasm. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The opening of the Hope Station temporary shelter took place on a sunny Sunday morning. Hundreds of people from the town and surrounding area attended. Jason was moved to see how the project had grown. What began as a personal discovery had transformed into something that would benefit many people. During the ceremony, the mayor gave an emotional speech about the importance of projects like this one. The town's priest blessed the facilities, and several people who had already been helped by the center shared their testimonials. But the most touching moment was when Grace was invited to speak. "I lived on this train for almost 10 years, she said, her voice trembling. "During the hardest times of my life, it was my shelter. Now, thanks to my son Jason and this wonderful community, it can be a shelter for others too." The audience gave a standing ovation. Jason felt tears streaming down his face. After the opening, the life of the Miller-Johnson family, as they now called themselves, settled into a new routine. Jason continued working at his auto repair shop during the day, but dedicated his afternoons to the center. Grace and Ruth took turns coordinating the activities. William, despite his limitations, helped by keeping track of the donations. The center quickly became more than just a simple temporary shelter. It turned into a community gathering spot. People organized summer festivals in the common car. Children from the town went there to play with Buddy. Elderly folks gathered to play dominoes and share stories. 3 months after the opening, Jason received a phone call that left him puzzled. "Hello? Is this Jason Miller?" "Speaking. My name is Richard Johnson. I am Grace Johnson's son." Jason nearly dropped the phone. "What do you mean?" "Grace Johnson is my mother. I saw in the newspaper that she's living there in Millbrook. I'd really like to meet her." Jason felt the world spin. Grace had another son. "Where are you?" "In New York. Can I come there today?" "Of course." "But are you sure you're Grace's son?" "Yes. I have my birth certificate and everything. She gave me up for adoption when I was a baby." Jason arranged to meet Richard at the town's bus station, but first he needed to tell Grace. When he got home, he found Grace in the kitchen preparing lunch. "Grace, I need to talk to you about something important." "What happened, Jason?" "You look pale." "I got a call from a man named Richard Johnson. He says he's your son." Grace dropped the pan on the floor. The noise brought Ruth and William into the kitchen. "Richard," whispered Grace. "My Richard." "You have another son?" asked Jason, still processing the information. Grace sat down in a chair, trembling. "I did. Before you were born, I had another baby, Richard. But I was very young. I couldn't raise him. I gave him up for adoption. Why did you never tell me this?" "Because it was the hardest time of my life. I was only 17. Richard's father left me when he found out I was pregnant. I had no family to help me. The only option was to give him up for adoption. Ruth approached her sister and hugged her. "Grace told me about Richard a few years ago," she said to Jason. "She always regretted giving him up." "He wants to come here to see you," said Jason. "He's arriving this afternoon." "Today?" Grace became even more nervous. "My God, he must hate me." "Grace, if he's coming to find you, it means he doesn't hate you," said William, approaching in his wheelchair. "He wants to meet you." The rest of the day flew by. Grace was extremely anxious, changing her clothes several times and obsessively tidying the house. At the appointed time, Jason went to pick up Richard at the bus station. He recognized him immediately. Richard was about 55 years old and bore a striking resemblance to Grace. The same light-colored eyes, the same face shape. "Richard?" "Jason," the man smiled. "It's incredible how much we look alike." Jason was surprised. He and Richard did share some similarities, even though they were only half-brothers. "How did you find us?" "I saw the newspaper article about the shelter. When I read the name Grace Johnson, I thought it might be her. I did more research and found out about you, too." On the way home, Richard told his story. He had been adopted by a good family in New York, had graduated as an engineer, and had his own company. He was married and had 2 adult children. "I always knew I was adopted," he said. "My adoptive parents never hid that from me, but it was only recently that I decided to look for my birth mother." "Why?" "My wife died 2 years ago. That's when I realized the importance of family. I wanted to know my roots." When they arrived home, Grace was on the porch, visibly nervous. When she saw Richard, she started to cry. "Richard? My son?" "Hi, Mum," said Richard, and it was the first time he had used that word to refer to her. The hug between mother and son was emotional. Grace kept repeating, my son," as if she couldn't believe he was really there. During dinner, Richard talked about his life. Grace listened to every word attentively, as if she wanted to make up for all the lost years. "Did you have a good life?" she asked. "Yes, I did. My adoptive parents loved me very much. They gave me opportunities that you might not have been able to give me at the time." "You don't hate me for giving you up for adoption?" "No, Mum, I understand. You were very young and alone. You did what you thought was best for me." Jason watched the conversation with a mix of joy and melancholy. It was wonderful to see Grace reuniting with both her sons, but it was also strange to discover he had an older half-brother. "Richard, would you like to see the center we created?" asked Jason. "I'd like that very much. From what I read in the newspaper, it's an amazing project." The next day, Jason took Richard to see the center. The half-brother was impressed with the work they had done. "This is really fantastic," said Richard, looking at the renovated train cars. "How many people have been helped so far?" "About 50 families have stayed here since we opened," replied Jason. "Some stayed just a few weeks, others a few months, until they could get back on their feet." "And how do you keep all this running?" "Community donations, support from the city, some fundraising events." Richard became thoughtful. "Jason, I'd like to make a proposal." "What proposal?" "My company in New York is doing very well. I'd like to make a significant donation to the center, and I'd also like to help with technical knowledge. I can design improvements, expansions." Jason was surprised by his half-brother's generosity. "Richard, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. It's my way of making up for all the years I was away from the family." "Are you thinking of moving here?" "I'm considering it. New York became too big, too lonely after my wife passed away. Here I have you." During the week Richard stayed in Millbrook, he and Jason grew very close. They discovered they had many things in common, despite the different lives they had led. Grace was radiant to have both her sons near. She spent hours talking with them, getting to know their stories, their personalities. "I never thought it would be possible," she said to Ruth, "to have both my sons with me." "Life sometimes gives us second chances," replied Ruth. When Richard returned to New York, it was to organize his permanent move to Millbrook. He had decided to sell his company in New York and invest in social projects in his mother's hometown. Richard's move happened 2 months later. He bought a house near Jason's property and immediately got involved in the shelter's projects. With Richard's financial and technical help, the shelter was expanded. They managed to renovate 2 additional train cars, and set up a workshop where the sheltered people could learn trades. The idea is to give people not just a temporary roof, but also tools to rebuild their lives, Richard explained to the local newspaper. Buddy, now about 15 years old, was noticeably slower, but remained the heart of the shelter. The dog had become a sort of town mascot. Children came from far away just to play with him. It was during a quiet afternoon at the shelter that Jason made another surprising discovery. Mrs. Parker had arrived with a box of old photographs. "Jason, I found these pictures in my attic. I think some might interest you." Jason began examining the photographs. Most were of town events over the years, but one photo in particular caught his attention. It was an image from the 1970s, showing the train station when it was still in operation. On the platform, Jason recognized several townspeople, including his parents. But there was something else. In the background of the photo, near one of the train cars, Jason saw a young couple with a baby. The man was clearly William, but the woman wasn't Margaret. It was Grace. "Mrs. Parker, when was this photo taken?" "Let me see. It must have been in 1973 or 1974. It was at the inauguration of the new station." Jason showed the photo to Grace, who was helping organize donations nearby. "Grace, look at this." Grace examined the photo and smiled nostalgically. "Wow, what a memory. You were about 2 years old in this photo. Were you happy back then?" "Yes, we were. Despite the problems we would have later, in the beginning, we were a happy family." Jason looked at the photo again. It was strange to see his parents young and happy, knowing everything that would happen later. "Grace, can I ask you something?" "Of course. What really happened between you and my father? Why did you separate?" Grace sighed and sat down in one of the shelter's chairs. "It's a complicated story, Jason. Your father and I got married very young. I was 19, he was 22. At first everything was fine, but then the problems started." "What kind of problems?" "Money, mostly. Your father worked at the train station, but the pay was low. I tried to work too, but you were little and there was no one to leave you with. The situation kept getting harder and harder." "And you started drinking because of that?" "I started drinking to forget the problems, and the more I drank, the more problems I created. Your father tried to help me at first, but then he gave up." "And the separation?" "We started fighting a lot. I would get aggressive when I drank. Your father was afraid I might harm you. One day, after a really bad fight, he said he was leaving with you. And you didn't try to stop him." "I did try. But I knew he was right. You would be happier away from me at that time." Jason felt a mix of sadness and understanding. He could imagine how difficult it had been for everyone back then. "Do you regret it?" "I regret drinking, causing so many problems, but I don't regret you leaving. I think it was best for you." "But you could have fought harder to recover and stay with us." "I could have, but I was too young and didn't know how. I had no support from anyone. My family had rejected me when I got pregnant with Richard out of wedlock." Jason understood the situation better. Grace had faced alone problems that would be difficult for anyone, especially someone so young. "Grace, have you ever thought about telling your story to the people who come through the shelter?" "What do you mean?" "Your story of overcoming. It could inspire other people who are going through similar difficulties." Grace became thoughtful. "Do you think my story could help someone?" "I'm sure of it. You went through very difficult times and managed to recover. That can give hope to other people." And that's how the project Stories of Hope was born. Once a week, Grace would tell her story to the people who were being sheltered at the center. She talked about her difficulties, her mistakes, but mainly about how she had managed to recover and rebuild her life. The sessions became very popular. People from outside the shelter also started to attend. Grace discovered she had a natural talent for public speaking and for connecting with people who were going through difficult situations. "Mom, you're becoming a kind of counselor," said Jason after one of the sessions. "I never thought my story could help anyone," replied Grace. "I always thought it was just a sequence of mistakes. Your mistakes turned into wisdom, and now you can share that wisdom with other people." Richard, who was present in the conversation, agreed. Grace, you should think about writing a book about your experience. A book? Grace laughed. I barely finished elementary school. It doesn't matter. You have a powerful story to tell. I can help with the technical part of the writing. The idea of the book excited the whole family. Grace began working with Richard on the narrative of her life, from the early pregnancy with Richard, through the marriage with William, the problems with drinking, the years living on the train until the reunion with her children. Meanwhile, the shelter continued to grow. They had managed to partner with companies in the area that offered temporary jobs to the people being sheltered. They also created a professional training program in partnership with the Comtech of the neighboring town. Buddy, despite his advanced age, continued to be a constant presence at the shelter. The dog had become a kind of unofficial therapist. People who arrived at the shelter, sad and discouraged, soon cheered up when playing with him. "This dog is special," commented one of the social workers who worked at the shelter. "I've never seen an animal so sensitive to people's emotions." "Buddy has been through a lot in his life," replied Jason. "I think that taught him to understand others' suffering." One afternoon, Jason was organizing some old photographs when he found something that intrigued him. It was a photograph of Buddy still young but not with Grace. The dog was next to an elderly man that Jason didn't recognize. "Grace, who is this man?" he asked, showing the photo. Grace examined the image. "That's old Jack. He lived near the train. He's the one who gave me Buddy." "What do you mean?" "When I started living on the train, old Jack showed up one day with Buddy still a puppy. He said he couldn't take care of him anymore and asked if I wanted to keep him." "What happened to old Jack?" "He passed away a few years later. He was very old. Must have been over 80 at the time." Jason became thoughtful. Buddy's story was even more complicated than he had imagined. The dog had belonged to at least 3 different people throughout his life. "Grace, do you know where old Jack lived?" "He lived in a small house at the end of the street that goes to the train." "Why?" "Just curiosity. I want to understand Buddy's story better." The next day, Jason went to the place Grace had described. The house was abandoned, but the neighbors still remembered old Jack. "Oh, old Jack," said an elderly lady. "What a good man. He took care of many animals that nobody wanted. Do you know where he got the dog he gave to Grace?" "Little Buddy? That dog has an interesting story. Old Jack told me he found him as a puppy at the train station back in the 1990s. It seemed like his mother had been hit by a car and he was all alone." Jason did some quick math. If Buddy had been born in the 1990s and it was now 2024, the dog would be over 30 years old. That was impossible for a dog. "Are you sure about that date?" "Yes, I am. I remember because it was around the time my husband passed away. 1995 or 1996. Jason went home confused. The numbers didn't add up. Buddy couldn't be 30 years old. That night, he observed the dog more closely. Buddy really did seem very old, but not impossibly old. Maybe the neighbor was mixing up the dates. "Buddy, you're full of mysteries," said Jason, petting the animal. Buddy looked at him with intelligent eyes, as if he perfectly understood what was being said. The following month, Grace's book was ready. Richard had found a small publisher in New York that was interested in the story. The book was called Tracks of Hope, A Journey of Rebuilding. The launch took place at the shelter itself, in an emotional ceremony. Grace was nervous but also proud. She had never imagined that one day she would be an author. "I want to dedicate this book to my 2 sons," she said during the launch speech. "Jason and Richard, who gave me a second chance to be a mother, and also to Buddy, who was my companion during the most difficult times." The book was received better than they had expected. Several people from the area bought copies, and some larger newspapers wrote positive reviews. But the most important thing was the impact the book had on people who were going through hard times. Grace started receiving letters from readers telling her how her story had inspired them not to give up. "Mum, you're becoming a famous writer," Jason joked. "Not famous, but I'm happy that my story can help other people." During a particularly busy afternoon at the shelter, Jason noticed that Buddy was quieter than usual. The dog, who normally greeted every person who arrived, was lying in a corner, breathing with difficulty. "Buddy, are you okay?" asked Jason, kneeling beside the animal. The dog lifted his head and looked at him with tired eyes. Jason felt a tightness in his chest. He knew Buddy was very old, and that this day would eventually come. "Grace, I think we need to take Buddy to the vet." The diagnosis was no surprise. Buddy had age-related heart problems. The vet said there wasn't much they could do besides keeping the animal comfortable. "How long does he have?" asked Grace with tears in her eyes. "It's hard to say. It could be a few weeks, a few months. It depends on how his body responds." That night, the whole family gathered to decide how to care for Buddy in his final moments. They decided he would stay at home, surrounded by love rather than suffer through treatments that might prolong his suffering. "Buddy was the one who brought our family back together," said Jason. "Now it's our turn to take care of him." In the days that followed, Buddy received visits from many people who had been touched by his presence at the shelter. Children came to draw pictures for him. Adults brought their own pets to say goodbye. "I've never seen a dog so loved by so many people," commented Richard. "Buddy touched many people's lives," replied Grace. "He has a huge heart." A week later, on a quiet morning, Buddy passed away sleeping in Grace's lap. It was peaceful, without suffering. The family was all gathered around him. "Thank you, Buddy," whispered Grace. "Thank you for everything you did for our family." Buddy's wake was surprising. Hundreds of people came to say goodbye to the dog who had become a symbol of hope in the town. Children brought drawings. Adults shared stories of how Buddy had touched their lives. "Buddy was more than a dog," said the mayor during an impromptu tribute. "He was a symbol that love and perseverance can overcome any difficulty." They buried Buddy in a special corner of the center, under a tree he liked to lie under. They placed a simple plaque, "Buddy, the dog who brought together a family and a community." After Buddy's passing, the family went through a period of mourning, but also of reflection on everything they had achieved since that morning when the dog had led Jason to the train. "Sometimes I think Buddy knew exactly what he was doing," Jason said to Richard one afternoon, "as if he had a plan to bring our family together." "Maybe he did," replied Richard. "Animals sometimes understand things that we don't." The center continued to operate and grow. With the revenue from Grace's book and the donations that kept coming in, they managed to expand the project even further. Richard had the idea of creating a memorial for Buddy, not just a tribute to the dog, but a space dedicated to all the stories of overcoming that had passed through the center. "Every person who has been here has a story to tell," he said. "We can create a space where these stories are preserved." The Stories Memorial was inaugurated 1 year after Buddy's passing. It was a small museum inside one of the train cars where visitors could learn about the stories of people who had been helped by the center. Grace became the official curator of the memorial. She interviewed people who passed through the center and documented their stories. "Every story is unique," she would tell visitors, "but they all have something in common: the human ability to reinvent oneself." 5 years after the discovery of the train, Jason looked with pride at everything they had built. The center had already helped more than 500 families. Grace's book was in its 3rd edition. Richard had remarried a social worker who worked at the center. William, despite his advanced age, continued to help with the numbers and had become a sort of grandfather to all the children who passed through the place. "I never imagined our family would become so large," Grace said to Jason one afternoon as they watched children playing in the center's courtyard. "It's true. And it all started with an insistent dog who wouldn't let me sleep. Buddy knew what he was doing. I'm sure he did." They fell silent for a moment, watching the activity at the center. It was lunchtime, and several families were heading to the dining hall. There was laughter, lively conversations, children running around. "Jason, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you regret looking for me? Your life was simpler before you found out about me." Jason looked at his mother affectionately. "Grace, finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. My life wasn't simpler before, it was empty. Now it has meaning. Even with all the problems I brought, you didn't bring problems. You brought a family. And along with that family, we found a purpose." Grace smiled and hugged her son. "I love you, Jason, and I'm very proud of the person you've become." "I love you too, Mom. And thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to start over." That night, Jason went to Buddy's grave for a moment of reflection, as he did every week. The tree had grown and now offered generous shade over the small headstone. "Thank you, Buddy," he said aloud. "Thank you for not giving up on bringing us together." A gentle breeze rustled the tree leaves, and Jason had the feeling that Buddy was there, somehow, approving everything they had built. As he walked back home, Jason thought of Emily. His late wife would be proud to see how he had found his family and turned that discovery into something that benefited so many people. "Emily, I hope you're watching all this," he murmured, looking at the starry sky. "Your Buddy fulfilled a very important mission." When he arrived home, he found the whole family gathered in the living room. Grace was telling stories to Richard's grandchildren. Ruth was knitting on the sofa. William was watching television in his wheelchair. It was a simple scene, but it represented everything Jason had dreamed of having: a united family, full of love and stories to tell. "Jason, come here," called Grace. "I was telling the children about the time Buddy brought a skunk into the train car." Jason joined the group and listened to the story he already knew, but enjoyed hearing again. Every story about Buddy was a way of keeping alive the memory of the dog who had changed their lives. "Grandma Grace, was Buddy really that smart?" asked one of Richard's granddaughters. "He was the smartest dog that ever lived," Grace replied. "He knew exactly how to make people feel better." "Is he in heaven now?" "Yes, my dear. And I'm sure he's still watching over our family from there." Jason smiled. Grace had become a wonderful grandmother, full of stories and affection to offer. It was hard to imagine that the same woman had spent years living alone in an abandoned train. "Jason, can you come outside with me?" called Richard. "I want to show you something." The brothers went out to the backyard. Richard pointed to the starry sky. "Today marks exactly 6 years since you first called me." "Really? I hadn't even realized. I wanted to thank you for reaching out to me, for including me in the family without question. Richard, you're my brother. There was no reason to question it. Not everyone would welcome an unknown brother with open arms. You and Grace gave me a second chance to have a family. And you gave us the chance to have the family we always dreamed of having." The brothers watched the stars in comfortable silence. It was incredible how their lives had intertwined so naturally. "Jason, I have an idea to expand the center even further." "What idea?" "What if we created a network? Other centers in other cities following the same model?" Jason got excited about the possibility. "That would be amazing. How many more people could we help?" "Exactly. I've already spoken with some contacts in New York and Stamford. There's interest. We'll need a lot of planning." "Of course, but we have the team for it, and more importantly, we have the necessary experience and passion." When they returned home, they found Grace organizing photo albums on the living room table. "What are you doing, Mum?" "I'm organizing all our photos since we reunited. I want to make a special album for each of you." Jason sat beside her and began to help. There were photos from the center's opening, the book launch, birthdays, Christmases, and everyday family moments. "Look at this one," said Grace, showing a photo of all of them with Buddy on her lap. "It was on his last birthday." "Buddy is in almost all the photos," observed Richard. Of course, he was part of the family. Jason picked up a particularly touching photo. It was the day when Richard had first arrived. It showed Grace hugging their 2 children, with tears of joy streaming down her face. "This is my favorite photo," he said. "Mine too," Grace agreed. "It was the day my family became complete." "Isn't Grandpa William missing from the picture?" asked one of Richard's granddaughters. "Yes, he is," said Jason. "Grandpa was taking the photo. And Aunt Ruth?" "She was also helping Grandpa with the camera." The girl became thoughtful. "So our family is really big, huh?" "Yes, it is," replied Grace, hugging her granddaughter. "And the most important thing, it's a family that chose each other, not just by blood, but by love." Jason smiled. Grace had learned a lot about the meaning of family over the years. She knew that family wasn't just those who shared the same genes, but those who shared the same love and care. "Mom, you're becoming very wise," Jason joked. "Age brings wisdom," she replied. "And mistakes too. I learned a lot from my mistakes. And now you teach other people to learn from theirs." "It's the least I can do. I got a second chance in life. I want to help others have the same opportunity." That early morning, Jason had trouble sleeping, not from sadness or worry, but from a quiet joy that kept him awake. He got up and went to the kitchen to make some tea. Through the window, he could see the shelter lit by the moon. Even at night, the place had a special energy. It was as if all the stories of overcoming that had passed through there had left a positive mark on the place. Jason thought of all the people who had been helped by the shelter. Families who had lost their homes and found not only shelter, but hope. People who had arrived broken and left rebuilt. "Emily, do you believe all this?" he whispered into the night. "Sometimes it still feels like a dream." As if answering his question, an owl landed on the backyard tree and watched him with wise eyes. Jason smiled. Emily always said that owls were symbols of wisdom and protection. "Thank you, my love," he said to the owl, "for bringing Buddy into our lives, for being part of the plan that brought us here." The owl hooted softly and flew away, leaving Jason with a feeling of complete peace. The next morning, Jason woke up to the sound of excited voices coming from the shelter. It was Sunday, a day when there were no scheduled activities, but some people always showed up to chat or help with small tasks. When he arrived at the shelter, he found a scene that filled him with joy. Several families who had been helped by the place were organizing a surprise party to celebrate 6 years of operation. "Jason!" shouted one of the children upon seeing him. "We managed to keep the secret." "What party is this?" "It's to celebrate everything you've done for us," explained one of the mothers. "We want to show how grateful we are." Jason was moved to see so many people gathered. There were families who had had their own homes for years, but still maintained ties with the shelter. There were people who now helped others going through the same difficulties they had faced. "Where are Grace and Richard?" asked Jason. "They already know about the party. They're on their way," replied one of the organizers. When Grace arrived and saw all the commotion, she began to cry with emotion. "I can't believe you organized all this for us," she said. "We organized it to say thank you," replied one of the men who had been helped by the shelter. "You changed our lives." The party lasted all day. There was music, food prepared by everyone, games for the children, and many stories shared. Each person told how the shelter had impacted their life. "This place isn't just a temporary shelter," said an elderly woman who had stayed at the center for a few months. "It's a place where we learn that there's always hope. And where we learn we're not alone," her husband added. During the party, Jason noticed something special. Many of the people who had been helped by the center were now helping others. A support network had been created that went far beyond the center itself. "Richard, are you seeing this?" Jason said to his brother. "We created something bigger than we imagined. It's true, it's not just a shelter, it's a community. An extended family," Grace added, having overheard the conversation. In the late afternoon, as the party was winding down, an elderly man approached Jason. "Are you Jason Miller?" "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" "My name is Paul Johnson. I'm Grace's cousin." Jason was surprised. Grace had never mentioned a cousin. "Grace is over there," Jason said, pointing to where she was talking with some children. "Actually, I wanted to speak with you first. I learned about your story from her book. I came here to apologize." "Apologize for what?" "My family rejected Grace when she got pregnant with Richard. We were very harsh with her. If we had helped her back then, maybe many things would have been different." Jason understood the situation. Paul was referring to the abandonment Grace had suffered from her original family. "That was over 50 years ago," Jason said. "Grace has moved past those hurts." "I know, but I still wanted to ask for forgiveness. And I wanted to offer help to the center." "What kind of help?" "I have a farm nearby. I can provide fresh food for the center, vegetables, fruits, eggs." Jason was touched by the offer. "I'll introduce you to Grace. I'm sure she'll be happy to see you." The reunion between Grace and Paul was emotional. Grace forgave him immediately and was happy to know she still had family who cared about her. "Paul, you don't need to apologize," she said. "The past is in the past. What matters is the present." "Grace, you've become an admirable woman. Everyone in the area talks about the work you do here. It's a family effort, and now you can be part of it too." That evening, after everyone had left, the family gathered to talk about the party. "It was the most special day since we were reunited," Grace said. "For me too," Richard agreed. Seeing all those grateful people was incredible. And discovering we have more family, Jason added. Paul seems like a good person. He is. He was always a good boy. The whole family was scared back when I was pregnant. Times were different. What matters is that you've reconnected now, William said, who had been quieter during the party because of his age. Dad, how did you feel today? Jason asked. I felt proud, the elderly man replied. Proud to see how you've become a good man, and proud to see how Grace has become a wise woman. Grace approached William and held his hand. William, thank you for taking good care of Jason all these years. Even with our past problems, you were a good father to him. And you're being a wonderful mother now, William replied. You're making up for lost time. It was the first time Jason had seen his two parents talking so affectionately since their reunion. He was moved to see they had completely forgiven each other. You know something? Jason said. I think Buddy would be very happy if he saw our family like this, united and at peace. I'm sure he's watching, Grace said, looking toward the tree where the dog's grave was. And I'm sure he's happy. That night, Jason dreamed of Buddy. In the dream, the dog was young and healthy again, running freely along the train tracks. But this time, instead of being alone, there were dozens of other people and animals running with him. Thank you, friend, Jason said in the dream. Thank you for not giving up on us. Buddy barked happily and kept running, disappearing into the mist of the dreamlike morning. When Jason woke up, he knew that dream was a message. Buddy had fulfilled his mission, but their work was just beginning. There were many more people to help, many more families to reunite, many more stories of hope to write, and he was ready to continue this mission alongside his reunited family and his extended community. End of story. And what did you think of this incredible journey of family reunion? Did Jason make the right choice by searching for his biological mother? Do you believe animals like Buddy can truly sense when a family needs to be brought together? Share your honest opinion in the comments. We love reading your reflections on these touching stories. Don't forget to leave your like if this story moved you, and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring narratives about family, overcoming challenges and second chances in life.